Radio programmers once held enormous power over what the public ever heard. Some tracks were too dangerous, too bizarre, or too inexplicable to survive their scrutiny.
When he first came to the mountains, his life was far away.
These are 10 songs considered too weird for radio. Hit that subscribe button, because this channel uncovers the music history they never taught you. Number 10, Rumble by Wray. The only instrumental ever banned from American radio had no words to censor. Despite its wordless nature, Rumble sparked immediate controversy upon its 1958 release, becoming one of the most remarkable cases of broadcast censorship in pop history. Radio stations across the United States refused to air it, with broadcasters claiming its menacing riff implicitly encouraged juvenile delinquency and gang violence. There was no lyric to pull, no verse to edit, and yet programmers found the sound itself threatening enough to add. The station's specific objection centered on the title. Rumble was street slang for a gang fight, and it was feared that the piece's harsh, distorted sound glorified that world for impressionable young listeners. In the studio, Wray had famously poked holes into the speaker cone of his amp with a pencil to achieve a raw, buzzing distortion that had never been captured on a commercial recording before. The track peaked at number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100 despite the bans. Pete Townshend of The Who has written that without Link, Wray, and Rumble, he would never have picked up a guitar. Bob Dylan called it among the finest instrumentals ever recorded. Jimmy Page was famously filmed listening to the song on vinyl in the 2008 documentary It Might Get Loud, a wordless recording, banned for having too much to say. Number 9, God Save the Queen by Sex Pistols.
God save the Queen! She ain't no human being!
There has rarely been a spectacle for the release of an anti-monarchist anthem, quite like this one. The song was banned from both the BBC and radio stations regulated by the Independent Broadcasting Authority. Radio 2 controller Charles McClelland publicly described it as in gross bad taste. Major retailers including Boots, W.H. Smith, and Woolworths all declined to stock the record. And yet, the song became the highest-selling single of the week of the Silver Jubilee's official observation in June 1977.
There is no future in England's dreaming.
The track reached number 1 on the NME chart and number 2 on the official UK singles chart, where it was listed as a blank entry to avoid causing offense in print. Multiple sources have since suggested that the song was deliberately held back from the official top spot despite its sales figures. The song peaked at number 2 during the very week of the Jubilee celebrations, making the chart position itself an act of political theater. The controversy never truly faded. Decades later, God Save the Queen remains one of the most debated broadcast and chart decisions in the entire history of British music, a flashpoint that said as much about the establishment as it did about punk. Number 8, Je t'aime moi non plus by Serge Gainsbourg and Jane Birkin. The Vatican does not typically issue formal condemnations of pop music. In 1969, they made an exception. This French duet triggered an official denunciation from L'Osservatore Romano, the Vatican's own newspaper, and radio stations across the UK, Italy, Spain, Sweden, and Brazil refused to air it, citing public decency concerns. The breathy vocals, slow tempo, and unmistakably intimate nature of the recording were unlike anything mainstream broadcasters had previously encountered. Gainsbourg had originally recorded the song with Brigitte Bardot in 1967. The session was so explicitly personal that Bardot's husband, German playboy Gunter Sachs, demanded the recording be pulled entirely, fearing the damage it could do to her public image. Jane Birkin stepped in to re-record the vocals, and the version the world came to know was born from that dramatic rejection. Despite the bans across multiple countries, the song became the first banned single, and the first foreign-language single, to officially reach the top of the UK charts. It remains one of the most recognizable and controversial recordings of the entire era, definitive proof that censorship rarely kills a great song, and sometimes does exactly the opposite. Number 7, I Am the Walrus by the Beatles. John Lennon later admitted he wrote parts of this song specifically to confuse the critics who spent hours dissecting Beatles lyrics for hidden meaning. What he produced instead was something that baffled everyone, including the BBC. The track appeared on the Magical Mystery Tour extended play in November 1967, and BBC programmers moved quickly to ban it. Their specific objections centered on the lyric, "You've been a naughty girl, you let your knickers down," a line that controllers deemed indecent for public broadcast. The surreal King Lear passage embedded within the recording, drawn from a BBC third program broadcast, added further confusion to what programmers were even dealing with. Lennon's response to the ban was largely amusement. The stream of consciousness imagery had been designed to be unanswerable, and the fact that the BBC couldn't figure out quite what to object to, beyond a single underwear reference, only proved his point. Bands from XTC to Oasis later cited Lennon's willingness to write something genuinely inexplicable as a turning point in understanding what rock music could do. The song remains one of the most analyzed recordings in popular music history, which is exactly the opposite of what its author claimed to intend when he sat down to write it. Number 6. Arnold Layne by Pink Floyd. The real Arnold Layne was a Cambridge underwear thief who operated in the same neighborhood where both Syd Barrett and Roger Waters grew up, and both of their mothers reportedly lost clothing to his activities. Barrett turned the story into a song, and when Pink Floyd released it as their debut single on March 10, 1967, radio programmers immediately took notice, though not in the way the band had hoped. Pirate radio station Radio London banned the record entirely, calling its subject matter too far removed from normal society for its listeners. The BBC followed with restrictions of their own, uncomfortable with the subject matter of the song's protagonist. Despite those bans, Arnold Layne climbed to number 20 on the UK singles chart. Producer Joe Boyd, who oversaw the recording at Sound Technique's studio in London, later described the song as evidence that Pink Floyd were operating in a creative space no other band had occupied. The song stands today as one of the most striking and unusual debut singles in British rock history, a story ripped directly from real life and banned precisely because of how real it was. Before we continue, how many of these bands did you already know about? Some of these decisions seem almost impossible to believe today. Which entry has surprised you the most so far? Drop your answer in the comments below and let us know where in the world you are watching from. Number 5. A Day in the Life by the Beatles. The closing track on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band was banned by the BBC the same year it was released in 1967. The corporation cited the lyric, "I'd love to turn you on," as a clear reference to drug use, and the phrase, "found my way upstairs and had a smoke," sealed the decision. Both John Lennon and Paul McCartney denied any drug intent behind the words, but the BBC stood firm throughout 1967 and beyond.
A crowd of people stood and stared.
Producer George Martin and engineer Jeff Emmerich had spent weeks crafting the recording, including the now legendary 40-piece orchestral crescendo that builds to a final, resonating piano chord lasting nearly a full minute. The ban meant that one of the most sonically ambitious records of the decade was kept off British public airwaves, not for anything explicitly graphic, but for a handful of words that a BBC committee found troubling enough to act on. Widely regarded as one of the greatest recordings in the history of rock music and frequently cited as a pinnacle of studio production, the song's radio ban remains one of the most ironic acts of broadcast censorship in pop music history.
But I just had to look.
Number 4. Lola by the Kinks.
Walked up to me and she asked me to dance. I asked her.
Ray Davies was in the middle of a North American tour when the BBC called with their decision. Lola had been banned, not for its storyline involving a romance with a transgender woman, which was considered remarkably progressive and empathetic for 1970, but because the original recording contained the brand name Coca-Cola. BBC policy strictly prohibited product promotion on air, and the lyric was an unambiguous violation of that policy.
I always wanted to be that way for my Lola.
What followed was one of the most absurd logistical episodes in rock history. Davies was forced to make a roughly 6,000-mile round-trip flight from New York to London and back, interrupting the band's American tour mid-schedule, just to re-record 2 words and replace Coca-Cola with the generic Cherry Cola. The corrected version was cleared for broadcast and climbed to number 2 on the UK singles chart in 1970. To this day, Lola is remembered as one of the most progressive and human singles of its era, and the story of the transatlantic flight has become almost as famous as the song itself. Banned for 2 words, remembered for everything else.
But I can't understand why she walk like a woman but talk like a man. Oh my Lola.
Number 3, Louie Louie by the Kingsmen. The entire recording took roughly 1 hour and cost around $50. Lead singer Jack Ely stood on tiptoe throughout, shouting into a single microphone suspended high from the ceiling while competing with loud guitars and crashing drums. Ely was wearing dental braces at the time, further slurring an already frantic and unintelligible vocal performance. Nobody could make out a single word, and that ambiguity became the entire problem. The song was banned by numerous radio stations across the United States, and Indiana Governor Matthew Welsh formally requested the song be pulled from the airwaves entirely in 1964, citing concerns about obscene content. The FBI launched a 31-month investigation into the record and ultimately concluded they were unable to interpret any of the wording in the record. In one memorable moment during the session, drummer Lynn Easton shouted an audible expletive at approximately the 54-second mark after fumbling a drum fill, captured permanently on tape. The FBI never identified it. The Kingsmen's version of the Richard Berry original climbed to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the defining records of American garage rock. A song the government couldn't decode, a song that became immortal because of it. Number 2, My Generation by The Who. 20 million records sold, an anthem that permanently altered the relationship between rock music and broadcasting authority. The Who released My Generation on October 29, 1965, and Roger Daltrey's deliberately fractured delivery, stuttering through phrases like, "Why don't you all fade away?" was designed to capture the inarticulate rage of British working-class youth. BBC programmers heard something else entirely and moved to restrict it. The official explanation for the BBC's reluctance was that the stuttering vocals might cause distress to listeners with genuine speech impediments. Most observers at the time found that reasoning almost impossible to accept at face value, noting that the more obvious interpretation of the repeated consonants was the more probable target. The BBC reversed course relatively quickly, likely because the record was already a runaway success, peaking at number 2 in the UK. Pete Townshend later described My Generation as the purest expression of youthful contempt he ever committed to tape. Bands from The Jam to The Clash cited it as a foundational text. The band lasted only weeks, but became permanently attached to the song's legend, adding another layer of defiance to a record that was already built entirely from defiance. Number 1, Rocky Mountain High by John Denver.
First came to the mountains, his life was far away.
A camping trip near Aspen, Colorado changed everything. Denver witnessed a spectacular meteor shower at roughly 11,000 feet of elevation, the kind of moment that makes grown men go quiet, and spent 9 months turning it into a song alongside guitarist Mike Taylor. The result was a gentle acoustic meditation on peace, wilderness, and natural beauty. And some radio stations decided it was a drug anthem.
Shadows from the starlight, softer than a lullaby.
The FCC had issued a 1971 notice about songs that could be interpreted as promoting drug use, and certain programmers flagged the phrase "everybody's high," set around a campfire beneath a meteor shower, as qualifying for removal from the airwaves. Denver addressed the matter directly when he testified before the Senate in September 1985, explaining that those who banned the song had simply never experienced the Rocky Mountains at altitude and could not understand the experience that inspired it.
Rocky Mountain High.
The song had already risen to number 9 on the US Hot 100 in early 1973. On March 12, 2007, the Colorado General Assembly made Rocky Mountain High one of 2 official state songs. A song once banned for the word high is now the official soundtrack of an entire American state. Sometimes the censors lose so completely it becomes beautiful.